Well, good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in the world today. We are very excited to have with us Helen Pengelly, who is not only a spiritual guide, but also a coach and an author. So, this is going to be a really exciting discussion. And as mentioned, this is a deep dive. This is not a usual interview that we're going to be doing with Helen. And our topic today is one that I find really interesting, and it's meditation and food. But before we dive into that, Helen, how have you been? And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this deep dive with us here on the Wellness Lifestyle channel.
Oh, you're very welcome, Stefan. I'm happy to be here because they're two of my favourite things, really. Meditation, food, or I like the C's: cooking and consciousness, and coaching.
Oh,
The C as well. Oh, and comedy, because I do a bit of stand-up comedy as well. All the C's. Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I like that, though, cooking and consciousness, because I do admit that for me specifically, cooking is a great way for me to relax and unwind, and also just a way for me to let my brain run off and sort out the bits and bobs from the day. So it kind of acts like a bit of a meditation while I'm doing it. But I've never actually thought of it as that, cooking and consciousness.
Yeah.
But Helen, maybe you could tell us a bit more about what meditation and food, those two things taken together, mean to you.
Yeah. Well, I started meditating about 15 years ago. I went to a workshop which was run by some people I knew who ran spiritual tours, and the next day I just felt so calm. I've got three sons, so I was a single mum. They were quite young at the time, and I just felt really calm, with three boys running around, and I thought, oh, I need more of this. So, and then of course the universe sent it on my way. I was in the shop one day, I saw a little flyer of some classes starting that week, and it was when my boys were at Scouts, so I didn't need to get a babysitter, and it all kind of fell into place. And so, and I was having some problems with my eldest son, and he was 16, 17, I think at the time. And so it really helped me with that, and taught me the importance of self-care, and that I matter too, because I'd spent most of my life putting everybody else's needs before my own, because that was the way we're brought up, that it's selfish. And so that taught me that actually I do matter, and that my needs are just as important as anybody else's. And I've always loved cooking. I learned to cook at a very young age, because my mum's a great cook and she taught me. So I'm very grateful to her for that. Because like you, I find it a great way to de-stress. It's an outlet for my creativity. But what I've noticed that it's not like that for a lot of people. A lot of people, it's quite stressful. But it's like anything, the conditions that we're brought up with still inform us, when we're adults, no matter how old we are. It's all ingrained in there. So and also I think it's really important as well, because that, as you know, everything's energy, and that energy is going into the food as well. So if you're stressed and I don't like this, you're putting that energy into the food. So it's like, if you infuse it with love, then you're going to feel better after you've eaten it. And I've been going on retreats now for, when did I go on my first retreat? 2009, so 12 years now. I've been going on retreats, and for the last 10 years, I've actually been a volunteer cook at a retreat centre. And that all kind of happened as well, because they were looking for somebody to cook. I was there and they said, would you come? Would any of you be interested in cooking? And I said, oh, I would. Because actually being a chef was one of the careers that I considered when I was growing up, but I didn't like meat and fish, and the thought of handling that, I just thought, I don't want to do that. But it's a Buddhist retreat centre, so all the food's vegan, so it's just perfect. I've created my ideal job, but I wouldn't want to do it all the time, because it is like when you're cooking for a lot of people, it's quite intense as well. Yes. But as I said, I've been told by people, and I'm not bragging here, this is what people have said to me, that it's the best food that they've ever had on a retreat. I'm thinking, well, they're the same recipes, the same menus they have almost every week, maybe a bit of variation, but they have their standard recipes. And I'm thinking, well, why, if it's the same sort of menu and the same food that's being served, why is mine any better than anybody else's? And I think it does. It comes down to that love. And I get retreat leaders asking me to come and cook on their retreats because they say, oh, you're just so calm in the kitchen. And of course, if they know that I've got a handle on it and the food's going to be delivered on time, it takes the pressure off them as well. They know that it's in capable hands and they can get on with doing what they're good at, right, and leading the retreat. And I think, you know, it's quite important that you all work together as a team, and you go and you do, and it's a way for me to give something back as well for everything that I've got. And yeah, so, and food has played a big part in my life because I also have celiac disease, and I was diagnosed with that about 18 years ago. So I have to be obviously very conscious about what I eat so I don't get ill. And that really opened my eyes up to the food industry and all the stuff that goes in our food as well. And so it's that was an education, and I learned so much. Although I'm not a qualified nutritionist by any means, and I would never claim to be an expert, but I do know a lot because I had to learn for my own benefit. Because doctors aren't, well, did you know I found out they spend, in 7 years training, they only spend half a day in 7 years learning about nutrition. But of course, what we eat, what we put in our body is really important for our health. And some people, I mean, things are changing now, but in the past, people would have thought you were crazy. Well, if you eat unhealthy food all the time, you're going to get ill at some point. You know, you can't suddenly expect the doctor to just give you a magic pill and you're going to get better. You've got to look at what you're eating. So, and of course, that also affects, you know, your state of mind as well, because if you're eating, you know, fast foods and processed foods all the time, it kind of it can fog your brain as well. And I know for myself, I try not to eat too much sugar because sugar's very addictive, and I know if I've had too much that I feel it, you know. I can feel tired or dehydrated or, yeah.
So, Helen, you brought up quite a number of different points there that I'd actually like to speak to a little bit. Because, first of all, just around the intent when you're actually cooking something and making something. I've noticed that myself, where depending on what my mood is like when I'm busy cooking, will greatly impact how people respond to the food. And it'll be the exact same recipe that I've done 100 times before. But if I'm in an elated mood and really pouring that love into the food that I'm cooking, right? People will just turn around and go, oh my goodness, that was the best pot of curry I've ever had in my life. And I'm like, it's the same curry I made for you last week, the exact same one, same ingredients, right? Nothing's changed. And yet here we are. And it is just the intent. But then the second part that I think you raised there that I think is so important, and something that I came across on my first meditation retreat, where they insisted that for the week, and it wasn't really retreats, it was just sort of an evening meditation class, and then Saturday and Sunday were full days.
Yeah.
But they asked that we really watch our diets over the entire week. So they said to us, no dairy, no meat of any kind. Even vegetables were severely restricted. We weren't allowed to have onions or mushrooms or something else as well that we weren't allowed to have. And no alcohol and no cigarettes and no caffeine. So not even green tea. And I did it for the week. And the first couple of days, I will admit, were really rough because also no sugar. So the withdrawals from the sugar specifically were so phenomenally bad. Everything else I kind of managed with a little bit better. Other people complained a bit more, but we got through it. But what was so incredible was at the end of it, he said, now you can start reintroducing these foods back into your diet as you choose. He says, but I'd like you to, just because of how mindful you've been this week, start to notice how your mood shifts when you eat certain types of food. And I kind of dismissed it as, oh no, he's just being, a little bit pedantic, really. Only to then sort of get a bit deeper into it and start to realize that when I eat, for instance, a heavy curry, which I really enjoy, I keep coming back to curry, but I really do enjoy my curries.
So do I.
I will notice that depending on when I eat it in the day, it will affect my mood. It can either make me highly energized, or if I have it too late in the afternoon, it can actually have the reverse effect. And then you start to learn how these things actually impact you. And then when I went back to the same teacher and I said this to him, he goes, right, now this is why food actually, for his discipline, goes hand in hand with meditation. Because he says, first of all, one of the things that he always would say is never meditate if you've just eaten, because all your energy is going to your stomach. Your brain can't relax and settle into a meditative state. He says, but equally, it's more difficult to slip into a meditative state if your mood is all over the place, just based on what you've eaten in the last 72 hours. And that really kind of stuck with me. I'll go, okay, I had a really heavy, for instance, pizza, which always makes me very lethargic. Really enjoy it in the moment, of course. But thereafter, I'm kind of going, feeling a bit lethargic, maybe even a little bit depressive at times. And I'll then know that for the next couple of days, reaching that deep meditative state is going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, I raise all of that because I'd love to hear your take on it, if you've had similar experiences in your journey with food and meditation.
Yeah, well, for me, it was more the ethics side of it, I think, because I decided, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago now. Apparently I liked fish when I was very little, but I haven't eaten fish or seafood since I was little. And I didn't really like meat growing up, but but the family were like, oh, go on, just try it. And I did start eating it. Mm-hmm. And then I decided one year I would just give up eating meat for Lent. And because then it just seemed like, okay, it's only 6 weeks. I can decide what I want to do at the end of it. And then I saw something, I think one of my friend's daughters, who's a vegan, shared something on Facebook about baby chickens. And, they kill all the male chicks because obviously they don't lay eggs. And then it was kind of like, although I probably, it on one level, but that was when it really sunk in that actually the whole, again, as I say, I'd learned a lot about the food industry after my diagnosis with celiac disease, because I also had a business selling gluten-free food. So I was in it as well. And in the end, I thought, I don't want to be part of this. But I hadn't really considered all the amount of cruelty that was involved with the mass production that we have these days. Well, I knew about animals, but in terms of meat production, but not so much. I hadn't really considered like the dairy and the eggs, because it's like, oh, well, you're a vegetarian, you can still eat dairy because the animals aren't killed, but actually they are. And it's the same with milk, because obviously the male cows aren't any use because they don't produce milk. So, yeah. And they're taken away from their mothers and all that kind of thing. So I thought, actually, you know what? I'm going to not only give up meat, I'm going to give up eating all animal products for this 6 weeks and just see how it goes, because I really love cheese, and I was thinking, oh god, an egg. So I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be really hard because I love those foods. But actually I found it wasn't. And I think I used to be a teacher. I was teaching in a very difficult school at the time, and I just found that I had more energy and I felt cleaner inside. Yep. And so at the end of it, I just thought, no, I don't want to go back to that. Now, because I have celiac disease, I don't claim to be 100% vegan, because I do sometimes have dairy and eggs when I'm out, because it's not always possible to get something that's gluten-free and vegan. So obviously gluten-free has to take a priority. But also, you know, until I became gluten-free, I never had any energy, and because obviously my body wasn't absorbing any nutrients. And now a lot of people say, oh, but wheat makes me feel bad, you know, I get a bloated stomach. And the issue is, it's not necessarily the wheat itself, but it's the way it's grown now and the way bread is produced. Because in the past, bread was left to ferment and it would break down all the gluten, but now they put extra gluten in it to so the bread rises more quickly and it's ready, you know, so fast production. So of course that's not good. Well, obviously not for me, but for anybody. So, you know, the more traditional grains, I mean, I can't eat them because they're not gluten-free, but things like rye and spelt are much better because they're closer to how the grains used to be before they all became sort of, I can't remember what you call it. It's not genetically modified, but it's something else, you know, when they
mass produce,
well, they crossbreed them and all that kind of thing to change them. So they're not like the original grains that we used to eat sort of thousands of years ago. So so that's also, you know, an issue as well, because it's become trendy to kind of be gluten-free, but it's not. But you should never cut out gluten unless you've got a medical need for it, or wheat or anything like that. It's not advised because you could be missing out on major nutrients. And I think that's the other thing, that gluten-free and vegan is perceived as being healthy, but it's not necessarily, because there's plenty of processed foods that are vegan and gluten-free, and now there's more than ever. There seems to be more new things coming out each week, so you could go and buy all that stuff and just live on gluten-free pizzas and vegan pizzas and pies and cakes and all that stuff. So it's not necessarily healthy. And I even pulled up one of her supermarkets once because I was in there, and above the gluten-free section they got well-being, and I said, no, this is not this is misleading, because a lot of this stuff is just highly processed. It's full of carbs, you know, refined carbohydrates and sugars and things that aren't good for you. So people are being sort of misled, thinking, oh, well, I'll buy the gluten-free cake instead of the one with wheat in it because it's healthier, but it's not.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. But before I mention what I was going to say, Priscilla has a comment here. She says that she feels sluggish after eating any carbs like pasta and bread.
Yeah.
Now, that is very interesting, because you mentioned something when you were just talking now about, you know, just thinking, oh, I should just go vegan and gluten-free and that'll be healthier. It's not necessarily the case. And I often will say to my friends and that who try and get on the health buzz, that you really have to see what works for you as an individual. You know, so for me and my friends, we have wildly differing needs in our diets. So where I had a friend who does exceptionally well on keto, you know, he can eat just protein and fat, and he does phenomenally well. I feel incredibly heavy and sluggish if I go keto. But then if I eat maybe slightly less meat, but increase my fruit intake, specifically fruit, not my vegetable intake, my energy levels go through the roof. Everybody says, oh my God, your skin's glowing. You're looking so great. I feel better mentally. I'm more present, all the rest of it. Put that same friend of mine on that diet of more fruit, and he just absolutely crashes, can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So it really is about figuring out what is good for your body and working in line with that. But I then do also think that there's a huge problem in our culture where we just eat too much, actually, because it's so readily available.
We do. And I sometimes feel like that walking around the supermarket, and you just see all that food, and sometimes you just feel physically sick. And I think you're right, and it's quick, you know, like fast food and things like that. And like we were going back to what we were saying earlier about the cooking. I mean, it's like, you know, and I just sort of think back, a typical example of, say, in Mediterranean countries when they take a long lunch breaks. I lived in Spain for 2 years, and they have like a 3-hour lunch break, and they enjoy the meal, and they all sit down as a family, and it's a big part of their day, you know. Whereas I think in our cultures we tend to just, you know, want to grab things on the go. And when I was teaching as well, that was something I always made sure I sat down and ate my lunch, and I'd see the other teachers rushing around and doing whatever they were doing. But I thought, no, I'm going to be setting a good example here, and I'm not going to be working while I'm eating. I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to just eat my food. And everybody would, because I'm celiac, I couldn't get things out of the canteen because there was very rarely anything I could eat.
Right.
And don't get me started on school dinners. I think Jamie Oliver's done a whole thing on that anyway. But so, you know, I would take in things like salads, and you would think, oh, looking, you know, which bulk of salad tends to be lettuce with some other bits and pieces and a bit of protein and stuff thrown in. But actually, like you said, if I sort of had a sandwich or something like that, I'd be feeling tired in the afternoon. And I always used to, but then that was probably because I didn't know I was celiac. But then I found that by eating salads and stuff and fresh fruit and stuff at lunchtime, although it might not look as filling, but actually I didn't get as hungry afterwards. I wasn't craving like snacks and things, and my energy level stayed high, which is important when you're teaching as well. You can't fall asleep in front of the class. It's different when you're in an office. It goes up at the desk, but you can't when you've got 30 kids in front of you.
But that is actually such a beautiful segue in back to sort of meditation, because this is something that Buddhists have been saying for generations, right? And the whole purpose of meditation is to be more mindful. And there could be nothing more mindful than sitting down and actually taking the time to enjoy your meal.
Yeah.
I think there's actually, I stand corrected, but I think there is actually a Buddhist, not proverb, but story of someone who goes to a master and says, how can I be more mindful? And the master says, when you walk, just walk. Yeah. When you sit down to eat, just eat. And it's so true, like you say, you know, when you notice that the other teachers are running around doing odds and ends, and today's day and age can get so intense that, you know, if you're in a corporate job, you sit down to have lunch, but you're also checking your email. You know, you're not actually stopping to enjoy the food, which, let me not get started on whether or not that is conducive to an attitude of gratitude, but you're definitely not mindful and you're definitely not present, which then just sort of snowballs, or rather I should say has this domino effect where just everything in life becomes distraction after distraction after distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, going, that's a really good important point about the gratitude, because we go into the supermarket and it's just there, isn't it? And we just take it for granted, and so, you know, it's like remembering the people that have produced that food, that have grown it, that have packaged it, or whatever their part was in that journey for that food to reach our plates. And I don't know if you've ever grown your own vegetables, but during the lockdown last year, I dug up part of my garden, made a vegetable patch. I had some successes and some complete disasters. I didn't grow at all, and it really gave me a new appreciation for people that grow vegetables, because it's not always that easy. You've got to have the right soil, the right amount of light, the right amount of water, not too much, not too little, da-de-da-de-da. And I think, you know, I always said that when I was teaching as well. I said we should be teaching these kids how to grow vegetables and how to feed themselves. You know, they don't need to know history facts. They can get that on Google, you know. It's like, let's teach them stuff that is going to actually, sorry, no disrespect to any history teachers out there. That was just one example. But, you know, even with my own subject, maths, a lot of it, I say, why are we teaching this to kids who don't want to go on and do maths at a higher level? You know, they just need to know how to do percentages and to do arithmetic so they can work out their bills and do their accounts and budget and that kind of thing. It's like, it's like we're not equipping our kids with these kind of skills to be able to feed themselves. And I live right near the beach, and so every morning as soon as I get up, I go and look at the sea. And there's in one of the gardens down there, obviously, you know, it's September now, so there's a little pear tree, and so there's all got all the pears on it now, and it just reminds you of how abundant nature is, and how that, you know, there's so much food out there for everybody. And it's like if I eat a lemon and I squeeze a lemon and all the pips come out, and you think every little pip there is a potential lemon tree which could produce another, I don't know how many lemons a tree produces. Eric's like to say it was another 1,000 lemons. So for each lemon, there could be another 6,000 lemons coming out of that lemon, you know. Right. And I think it's like, and we need to go back to that more simpler, more sustainable ways of living. And I'm really sort of conscious about where the food comes from. You know, it's like, do I really need to buy beans that have come from Kenya? No, I don't. I can find something that's been grown in the UK, and because it's like, yeah, and going back to kind of, I don't do that, but I would like to kind of get back to eating with the seasons and eating what's in season as well, because I think the more you do that, like you were saying, the more you become in tune with what your body needs. Now it's like I don't eat meat and hardly any animal products at all, but I'm not one of these. I don't like it when people become militant about it, because right. I used to eat meat, and everybody's on their journey, and so it's what's right for them. And in some places, I was watching a documentary about I think it was on Amazon Prime. It was an amazing documentary. It was called The Medicine Buddha, about this guy who's a doctor in Mongolia, and he every morning in his hospital, all the doctors and nurses and some of the patients as well all sit down to meditate. Thinking, God, if they did that in all the hospitals over the world, what a difference it would make to people's health. And of course, because Mongolia's very harsh environment and not much grows there, they eat a lot of meat. So it's like, even though they're Buddhists, so it's not, but the way they do it, it's not mass produced in big factories and slaughterhouses. They care for the animals themselves. And that was something I learned growing up, because we used to go to France on holiday we went quite a few times, because my parents had a friend who lived near in the south of France, and they were brought up in France because his parents were farmers. But if they wanted to eat meat, they had to learn where it came from. And it was the same when we lived in Spain as well, that they were just close to the animals. They brought them up, they slaughtered them, they used every part of that animal, nothing went to waste, you know. So it's not like you go in the supermarket and you see a steak in a little plastic thing and you don't even consider where that's come from. Because one of my sons was working when he was at college. He had a part-time job in the supermarket, and he said to me one day, he said I had to throw away this chicken that was out of date. And he said, and it just made me think, what was the point of that chicken's life? And you're thinking, yeah, you know, animals aren't commodities, they're sentient beings. And you know, whether you eat meat or not, it's like they still deserve to be treated with respect, you know. So, and I think I don't know if you've heard of him in South Africa. There's a guy, he's a TV, I don't know if he's a chef or what he is, but he's called Hugh Fernie Whittingstall, and he had a program where it was all about chickens, really. And so he got a group of people to raise their own chickens, because they went to, even like the so-called free range, the way they were kept and treated wasn't very nice. It put you off forever. And they just said, you know, they raised these chickens. Some of them couldn't bear to slaughter them, but they did. But they just said it tasted so much better because the chicken had a happier life and that kind of thing. So again, it's like you put it on your plate, shovel it in. You're not really thinking about that. And before I gave up meat completely, that was I'd already stopped eating chicken, because it was just like I just went off it. And the only thing I think I came off it gradually. I noticed when I think back, the only meat I was eating by the time I gave it up was organic steak, because I just didn't like to think of all the hormones and all the other stuff that they give these animals. So yeah, it's really thinking about, you know, where your food comes from, again related to that mindfulness, because when you meditate and you become more mindful, you just become, because the Buddha talked about the three things: ethics, meditation, and wisdom, you know, on the path to enlightenment. So
Yeah.
you do them, you know, some people start with the ethics, and I started with the meditation, and then the more I meditated, the more I noticed how more ethical my life was becoming as well at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're more mindful and you're more aware of your actions day in and day out. I mean, I noticed, so my journey started also slightly differently. I didn't really start with meditation, but a large part of my teenage years were spent in Zambia. And there, yes, you can pop down to the supermarket and get your chicken and meat and all the rest of it. But more often than not, you would actually go to the butchery and get fresh meat, right? And it was the chickens were running rampant on the farm, and the cows were running rampant on the farm, and you could see that they were having a good life and all the rest of it. But what I found so interesting was, aside from the fact that my mother did enforce that I had to slaughter at least one animal, she was like, if you're going to carry on eating meat, this is because she grew up on a farm, and this was their rule. If you're going to eat meat, you have to kill one animal so that you can see what it takes to get that meat onto your table. So sure, I did it awfully. I managed to slaughter my own little duck. But what I found so interesting when we came back to South Africa, because it hadn't really twigged for me beforehand, but when we came back to South Africa and I started buying meat again in the supermarkets, I started to notice that the color of the meat was different. Like beef was redder here and chicken was whiter. And then I actually asked, I went and I did a bit of research, and I went up to one of the butcheries, the local butcheries, and I said, just a question, you know, the food that we were eating in Zambia, very healthy, you know, you could taste chicken was chicken. It wasn't just sort of this generic taste, which is why I think everyone thinks that everything tastes like chicken. It doesn't. Chicken is not supposed to taste like that. And he admitted to me, oh, Suki's joined. Hello, Suki. Nice to have you. He admitted to me that what actually happens is they color or bleach the meat, depending on what it needs to look like. So he said, so chicken is bleached to get that white color. Because if you slaughter a chicken, a wild chicken, that meat is not white once you skin it by any stretch of the imagination. And even when you cook it sometimes. You know, so I thought that was really interesting, because then it really does bring home for you just how out of touch we can be in civilized society with where our food comes from and how it's prepared, even if it's raw, before it gets to our tables. And then we wonder, why does this impact us so heavily? Because as you say, there's also then all the hormones and whatnot that is pumped into not just our meat, but our vegetables as well, you know, to get them. Your tomato is so big and juicy.
Yeah.
That's not how a tomato is supposed. Tomato is supposed to be tasty and juicy, yes. But when it's big like that and fairly tasteless, you're kind of going, well, what's gone on here? What have we done to this?
Yeah.
So
well, the soils are just so depleted from nutrients now because of all the pesticides and things like that, and monocultures. Because I remember learning about that at school, about crop rotation, and the reason they did that was so that you had a different crop in the fields each year, because they took different nutrients out of the soil and then replaced the other ones that it needed. So it kept being so you didn't need to use fertilizers and weed killers and pesticides and things like that, because it was all natural. And I think, you know, more people are realizing now that we need to sort of, obviously, you know, with all the stuff around the pesticides and the bees and everything else, that we can't carry on like this. Otherwise, we're just going to kill the planet, literally, because if there's no bees, everything else is going to die. And we can't, you know, these seeds, because the idea is, you know, you'd plant things and then you'd harvest the seeds and to use again the next year. And so, but that doesn't happen now. You go and buy your packet of seeds, and oftentimes you can't even use the seeds again to grow grow the new things. But you're right, when you have homegrown veg and stuff, you think, oh, this actually tastes like vegetables. I remember my dad gave me some apples a couple of years ago off their tree in the garden, and I'm not a huge fruit eater. I prefer vegetables, but apples I find like really hard and like, ooh. And then, oh my God, these are really soft and they taste like apples. And I mean, it's no wonder I don't like the ones from the supermarket, because they're really hard and they don't taste of anything. But apples are actually quite nice.
All food, if grown and treated correctly, can be quite delicious. And something that I just, maybe as we start to wrap this conversation up a little bit, is something just occurred to me, that because you were saying, it would be great if as children children in school were taught how to grow their own food and that sort of thing. One of the best things for me that's come out of this pandemic is the fact that everybody's been forced to work from home. And because of that, I mean, I know in the United States, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but people are realizing that if they don't have to go back into the office, they don't need to live in a cramped apartment in the middle of a city center anymore just to save on commutes. They can go live in the countryside on a much bigger property and really enjoy their lifestyles. And the reason I bring that up is because this is kind of an amazing opportunity for people to, because they now have more time on their hands as well, because you don't have that 2-hour commute each way in the morning and evening, to actually start growing their own food, at home. And yes, we can still have your supermarket chains and stuff for, the odds and bits and ends that you can't grow or don't want to grow, whatever the case may be. But on the whole, how amazing would it be if everybody just had a small little pocket in their back garden where they could grow their tomatoes, their lettuce, their cabbages, their bits and bobs, and maybe have a few chickens and get their fresh eggs. That to me would just be a far more mindful way of living and eating. And I see we have a comment from Priscilla. They try and change the products too much. Organic, natural is so. Yes, absolutely. Could not agree more. But at the same time, it's really difficult, and I shall hand that over to you as a question, Helen. I find it really difficult to find true organic and natural products, because more often than not, it says organic on the tin, but when you do a bit of digging, it's actually not.
No.
At least I find that here.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, unless you're buying it locally from where where it's been grown, it's come from, you can't. But again, it's like anything, you do your best, don't you? So it is, and I think there has been a lot of like greenwashing around all the organic stuff, because also you can have an organic farm, but you could have a non-organic farm next to it, and if they're spraying all that stuff, it's not just going to stay there. The wind is going to blow it across. So it's impossible, really, unless you grow all your own, so where it's come from. But like I say, you do your best, and I think obviously, I guess it's the same over there. Organic food's a lot more expensive because obviously it's not as intensively grown. But I just think, as you say, it's becoming more mindful, more aware, and it's better to eat, I suppose, non-organic vegetables than no vegetables at all. And I think also going back to what we were saying earlier in the cooking and about the energy that you put in your food. And I've been reading a great book by David Hawkins called Letting Go, and he talks about that. It's about the intention as well. So it's like, if you decide that this food is going to be good for you, and you're going to get all the nutrients that you need, then that helps, and produce and cooking it in a loving way as well. So you're getting that energy, because going back as well to the meat, I mean, that's another thing. Of course, no animal wants to be killed. So when you think how stressed that animal was when it died, you're getting that stress and that energy from the animal as well. So it's just something to be aware of. And I think that one of the British books I read, I think it was probably in the Noble Eightfold Path, and he talks about ethics in there and right livelihood. and about how you earn your living, and about, you know, people that work in abattoirs and things like that, they often leave because it's so stressful and so upsetting. But we don't hear about that side of things, you know. So it is a minefield, and we do. Yes, Suki, we definitely need a food revolution and education. But, you know, we do what we can. And like as you say, we do our best. And I don't think, you know, there were these militant vegans in Brighton a few years ago, and they went and stood outside a steak restaurant with all these recordings of cattle being slaughtered, and think that's not the way to go, because you just upset people and annoy them, and you have to listen, you have to talk to one another and hear their point of view. You say, well, this is why I don't eat meat, but I'm not going to, and not saying that you shouldn't be eating it and that kind of thing, but so this is why I do it, and then respect, you know, their reasons for why they do, kind of thing. But I do think, you know, I know a lot of people who are eating a lot less meat. Maybe they only have it once or twice a week now instead of every day, which is how it used to be, because meat used to be a lot more expensive. So it was a luxury. So, you know, 100 years ago, people would eat hardly any meat and lots more vegetables and other foods, and meat would just be a tiny, you know, it should only be a tiny, if you're eating meat, I can't remember what the proportions are, but it shouldn't take up more than a quarter of your plate. So
I remember that graph at school that would actually show you what your percentage of meat should be.
Yeah.
But I think this all ties in so beautifully with what Suki was saying here as well, that it's all about education. We need more people to be, well, we need everyone to be more educated on food, where it comes from, what it does to the body, what it does to the system, and by extension, how that actually affects our minds and our souls. Because right at the outset, you and I were talking about, you know, intention, and you brought that up now again, which I think is beautiful. But it also does have a knock-on effect, because, you know, we understand quite clearly how, for instance, hard drugs affects someone mentally and emotionally. But we never think of food in the same way. Yet food technically is a drug, because it has compounds in it that release into the system, and they have different effects. They can harm or heal. So having a better understanding as to what all of that entails, I think, is what is so important for people moving forward.
Absolutely. And because, you know, processed foods are usually high in sugar, saturated fats and salt, which are addictive. So it makes you want more. And it is, and like you said, when you were giving up sugar, I mean, I gave up eating sugar. Cut it out completely. Now I do have some. I mean, I made a little cake at the weekend. My son came, but I noticed now it doesn't have that same effect on me like it used to, because I can just have a bit, and then, you know, then I won't have any more for maybe a few weeks. But I made some shortbread a few weeks ago, and I didn't put as much sugar in as it said in the recipe, but it still tasted really sweet. So you do, your tastes change, and it's just it is worth sticking with it, because I just felt so much better, and I lost weight. Not that I was aiming to lose weight, but I just did, because, you know, I'm eating sugar. And I think also it's because there's been so much about fats and low fat, but the thing is, if something's low fat, it's going to be higher in sugar, and actually we need fats, we need healthy fats. A third of our calories should come from healthy fats. So if you're cutting out and not eating enough fats, you know, you need to be looking at that as well, because that's because the fats, we need the fats for our brain cells. So if you're not eating enough fat, then you might find that you can't think straight, or you're getting confused or whatever. So that's also
for sure.
Yeah,
I was laughing there because I was just thinking to myself how interesting it is that whenever I bake nowadays, I always half the sugar content. Whatever they say 2 cups of sugar, I'll put in 1. And like you say, it still tastes sweet, but it's because we've cut sugar out already. So we're less inundated day to day. But this conversation has been incredibly enlightening. And I'm looking forward to the next installment on this, where we do, I think, maybe a bit more of a deep dive on the meditative aspect of food as well, and
Yeah.
go a bit more into that. So, to our listeners who've joined us here today, and to those who are catching the replay, please do join us again. Our discussion will be at the same time in 2 weeks' time on the, and I just want to get the date, on the 28th of September. So that will be 11 a.m. British Standard Time, 12 p.m. Central European or South African Standard. To our American viewers, that would be 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time if you're wanting to join us live. Helen, this has been an absolute delight, and I cannot wait to do just a little bit more, as I said, a bit more of a deep dive on the meditative aspect, and also get your feedback from your retreat that you're about to go on. That sounds very exciting.
Yes, it's I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's something to do with myths and things like that. But I just choose the dates, and because they ask me which ones I want to go and cook on. And I know the guy that's leading Attila, he's very popular teacher. I've never been on one of his retreats before, so I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to just being around like-minded people and having a break. We're inside a lot now, as I say. We don't go out so much, and it's nice to have a change of scenery.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can agree more. Well, Helen, thank you so much again for your time with us here today. And we look forward to having you back in 2 weeks' time. Thank you, and have a great day, and have a blessed meditative retreat as well.
Thank you.